Where's that strength? You can look at the eclipse, but you can't handle a conversation about gender.
Today, we're diving deep into a conversation that's bound to challenge and inspire you. Our guest is Jordan Shapiro, a professor at Temple University and the author of Father Figure: How to Be a Feminist Dad.
Success in our world at this point demands a lot of the skills that have been traditionally coded as feminine. The boys are being raised to think they're not supposed to demonstrate them, which makes them unable to succeed because the world demands them.
Together, we'll explore the shifting landscape of masculinity, gender norms, and fatherhood in a world that's constantly evolving.
We don't want our next generation, another generation, to grow up thinking maturity means dominance, power, strength.
Jordan shares his personal story of growing up in Philadelphia, feeling like an outsider amidst traditional ideas of masculinity, and how that journey ultimately shaped his groundbreaking work.
We make the mistake of thinking we have to give those hard experiences to our kids. While I agree with you, they should go through a threshold. That doesn't mean they have to suffer trauma. What does it tell kids when they walk into Target and there's a pink Lego aisle and a blue Lego aisle? Like, why? It's Lego, right?
We'll tackle big questions about raising kids in a changing world, the intersections of parenting and technology, and how to prepare children for a future that's more inclusive and empathetic.
Ultimately, just remember the people you're prejudiced against are still people who are still suffering and still have the same feelings as you. And you can not like what they do, but we should try to make sure that they still don't have to suffer while you don't like what they do.
Have you ever wondered what masculinity even is in the modern era? Are you ready to move beyond the macho bully or the soy boy archetypes? I'm Marc Azoulay, and this is the Men's Therapy Podcast. Together, we'll explore how neuroscience, Jungian psychology, and Buddhist philosophy can transform your life, your marriage, and your business. Are you ready to deep dive into the minds of men? Let's begin. Hello, welcome back to the Men's Therapy Podcast. I'm your host, Marc Azoulay, and I'm here with Jordan Shapiro. He's a professor at Temple University, and he's written a number of books on fatherhood. His most recent one is called Father Figure: How to Be a Feminist Dad, which is great. I'm really excited to talk to you, Jordan, about your ideas around fatherhood and changing gender norms and masculinity. So, Jordan, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mark. It's great to be here. I'm excited for this conversation.
So we always like to start here kind of with your personal story. So what was your experience with masculinity growing up, and what made you kind of really focus your career and life around gender norms?
Yeah, well, it was actually kind of an accident that my work got in this direction. I mean, I grew up, I would say I grew up in Philadelphia. I live in Philadelphia, and it's a big sports town. I think most people know. So there's a lot of the kind of traditional sports kind of masculinity everywhere, and I didn't particularly fit so well into that as a kid growing up. I certainly felt a bit alienated from it. But it wasn't, I'm not one of these people who has this a horror story about trying to be brave or too strong or thinking I'm not man enough. Most of the time I was pretty confident. I just sort of felt like an outsider, but I liked it that way. So I didn't complain. I really only got into gender much later. It was after I had written about fatherhood already. And I was sort of, I had studied gender a bit as an undergrad and in graduate school, and the only reason I started to write about it because it occurred to me after reading a few things that like it's called patriarchy, right? Like it's about fatherhood, and here I was this fatherhood guy, and I felt like I had to address it from a gender perspective, not just from a perspective of how do we do what's best for our kids, and ultimately discover that those two things aren't real, are inseparable, right? That if we want to raise kids who are equipped for a new world, to do it without thinking about the questions of the way gender is being renegotiated, discussed, the conversation. I mean, not just gender, so many social justice issues that are in the forefront in a way they haven't been before, and to not consider that when you're thinking about how do I raise kids to be the best they can as they grow up, just felt sort of disingenuous. So I very quickly moved from the issues of technology, which aren't really that different, because in both when I was writing about technology and when I was writing about gender, I'm sort of writing about a world that's changing around us and how do parents think about it as they think about preparing their kids for that different world. There's a lot of other issues I would love to spend a lot of time writing about and thinking about. Gender was just the one that came up, but there's a lot of social issues. I'm obviously concerned about many other things also, but I think so much of the way that we communicate gender norms, roles, expectations to our kids happens in the nuclear family through ideas about what's good traditional parenting that we often don't reflect on because we all mean well. I think I've yet to meet a parent that doesn't mean well. Right. But that doesn't mean we always spend a lot of time thinking about where the things that felt good to us might not be the best things for a changing world.
Yeah, so let's just kind of dig into the changing world. I mean, there's so much there, and I'll put a pin on technology because I do want to talk about that as well. But if you look at gender norms, at least what I'm seeing as a therapist, and I'm curious if you can corroborate this or you have a different narrative, is we have like the traditional masculinity, which I think is branded by my industry, at least, as toxic masculinity, right? The kind of like, kind of stoic, bully kind of guy, right? A lot of that's like the boomer generation, kind of coming off of war trauma. And then you have my generation of millennials, right? Or Gen Xers, where like, I think we were responding to that and we made an anti-version of that, right? Which I call like the nice guy, right? Which is like very people-pleasing, kind of more meek, doesn't really have a lot of those traditional things. Just how like, that traditional masculinity was like anti-feminine, right? We are now like anti-toxic masculinity. And I'm curious, I guess to ask you directly is like, what is the next step? Because I hope to inspire men to like have a masculinity that is based on values and based on our own selves rather than being a response or a combative nature of what hasn't worked in the past. Does that make sense to you, or do you see that kind of trend?
No, I understand totally the question you're asking, and
Right.
And in some ways I think it's a sort of a shame that in the world of masculinity studies or masculinity conversation or therapy, like we don't have what the feminists have, which are they have their first wave, their second wave, their third wave, to think about the different ways that the same goal has sort of transformed as people have changed. And I think in some ways we're sort of mimicking that, right? So I think what you're saying is certainly there was an earlier stoic masculinity generation, the tough guy. I mean, some of that is built. It has to do with the industrial age and the economic model, right? So one of the things I write about in Father Figure is that the story that's been since the beginning of time is just false, right? For most of human history, everyone worked, right? Like no one could have, even the kids worked, right? They had to fight to be like, no, you can't make the kids work. And
I know.
The idea that like dad went to work and mom stayed home and cooked is just absurd, right? But that does become very an ideal in the industrial age, partially just because people start to commute to work and they start to go to factories. And what happens is, in order for that to make sense to people, that shift, they had to construct an image of work that was sort of cold and plate glass windows and factories and tough and stoic. And then they had to create the alternative, which was sort of compassion and nurture and home, right? Nobody commuted. The idea of work as a place is a like 20th century word. Even the word never got used as a place until the 20th century. So this whole commuting thing is where we kind of get these ideas of associating these gender norms. And I think you're right that once you get to Gen X, it starts to be like second wave feminism. For the listeners who don't know, second wave feminism is sort of, why can't women be doctors? Why can't they be lawyers? Why can't we just sort of have equality of the same opportunities and access for everyone. And I think you're right. Gen X was very much like, hey, we're not going to tell our daughters that they have to be virgins and they have to always like have their shirt buttoned all the way to the top. Or, we're going to let them have pleasure and jobs and work and all the things that, and we want that. And I think where we're moving now and it's very hard. And I think we're seeing so much backlash to it is actually acknowledging that the things we associate with masculinity and femininity, the things the things like the strength, the things like that we associate with masculinity, and the nurturing we associate with femininity, right? That these are not actually, there's no biological basis for that. There's only a cultural basis for that, and that's hard for people to deal with, because in order for us to create our modern economy, we had to convince everyone that there was a biological basis for it. So now we're kind of trying to undo that work. And part of what that means is sort of acknowledging that you can, not just, hey, a woman can be a doctor or a banker or a lawyer, but they can also be feminine and tough, right? Like those two things are, right? Those things aren't separate. That we don't need to sit there and go, oh, you're not womanly if you're tough. You're not masculine. You're not manly if you're nurturing, right? You can be, these things don't actually have any correlation with genitals. They don't have any correlation with our bodies. They don't have, there's way more, there's way more difference within one gender than there is difference between them, right? So what I mean by that is if you take an average of like all men and any of the attributes that people might associate with masculinity, you're actually going to see way more difference among men than you will see between the average man and the average woman.
Yeah. So let me ask you this: Do you believe that it's all just kind of an illusion, right? And I think like the queer movement would kind of state that, right? Where it's like everything's gray, everything's kind of a soup, everything's a spectrum, and masculine and femininity are completely constructed. Or is there some value, even if it's like masculine and feminine energies, right? There's other movements like the Tantra movement and things where they still have a binary, even though you can have a masculine woman and a feminine man. Where would you?
Yeah, I mean, I don't. My personal take on this is that I think there's probably some reality to the idea that certain attributes tend to bundle together and be associated together, but I don't think it has any connection to biology or gender, and so I find it sort of problematic. I've done a lot of writing and arguing that when we. To your example of the Tantra, where I have no problem with us acknowledging that there's sort of a binary between these different kinds of energies, right? As soon as we call them masculine and feminine, we create an expectation for real men and real women who feel like they have to meet that ideal, and they have to meet that model. Where if we just kind of called them, yin and yang, which we do often talk about as if they have gender, they don't actually have gender. Right. have gender in the actual, if in the actual origins, like in Taoism, in Zen, and right. That's not that they're not associated, but they do bundle again. So in that sense, I think that it is very real to say that, like, nurturing, holding, that those are certain kinds of energies that are opposed to penetrating and things, but the idea that we would associate them with people based on their biology is probably one of the best studied things in the entire 20th century, and has been disproven and debunked again and again and again and again and again. And they do these meta-analyses of all the studies. A meta-analysis, for people who don't know, is when somebody studies all the studies, right? They take the results from as many studies as they can get, and they compare all the data, and they look at what they actually found, and the effect sizes that create the stories we see in the media. Like when you see a story that says study shows that men are better at spatial reasoning, right? Like if you actually look at that study, they're talking about 0.01% difference, right? Right. But most people don't read the studies, and most of us like to hear these things because it fits with our economic model, fits with what we've seen on TV, fits with the kind of stories we're used to telling, and who wants to be thinking about change all the time, right? Sometimes you just want to sit back and enjoy entertainment and giggle and laugh and be like, that's a funny joke, but ultimately, my argument is it's doing a lot more harm than good. And you see it, whether you're talking to men or women or gender non-conforming individuals, it's people are always trying to fit some model of what they think is right? That's what people mean when they talk about being man enough, right? We often think of it as like you're trying to be strong enough, but it also means I want to be attractive. I think I should have a certain kind of earning potential. I think I should not ever be tired or sick. And then if you feel these things, if you feel sick, if you feel tired, if you aren't earning, you feel like you're not a good enough man. For women, on the other, if you don't feel like you want to nurture, if mothering's just not in your psychological constitution, many women feel like there's something broken about them, right? Which is just so sad to me, because it's nobody should feel broken because of an idea that is not real, right? An expectation that they never really needed to meet in the first place.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, and to use feminist language, right, these are structures of oppression. They're the kind of boxes that are built around people that really keep them stuck and keep this feeling of not good enough. I mean, we had a guest on just recently, Tim Desmond, who is a Buddhist practice, and he was talking about, mindful self-compassion, but how many people, men and women, everybody, right, they never feel good enough, right? They feel like they need to be more of something or less of something. And it just creates these horrible prisons that people are in. And as a therapist, I see that all the time. I mean, my job is really just breaking down the prison. People don't really need to change. It's just how you kind of relate to your life. So, I mean, I don't know if this is useful question. I want to be how do we get here? Because when I think of these things, there's this fantasy of this oppressive Illuminati or something, right? That's controlling gender norms. I don't think it's that simple, right? But it does seem like it's really restrictive. And I think a lot of men are really hurting now because the norms are so out of date. And I think they box out more guys than they include.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's true. And then I think you have, and I don't think one of the reasons I wrote Father Figure is I really didn't, there's not a good, there's very little that exists out there to sort of provide a model of what an alternative could look like, right? What an alternative, I think I'm going to guess any man who's listening to this, no matter what generation, has had enough locker room experiences in their middle school years to understand the way in which femininity and homophobia is used as an insult in order for men to lift themselves up by putting others down. And so it becomes very hard to even resist when you've got an entire childhood of people going, unless you're moving closer to this norm, you're a girl, you're gay, you're all these terrible things that get said and feel so, it's so, I can still remember how hard that felt as a kid, and so I think people are struggling because they can't reach it, and the alternative has already been coded as as a loss, right? As a weakness, as a failure, and so it's really it means not only stepping out of the current, but also stepping out of all these ideas and expectations that we have. As you said, it's a box, and again, it's not the only box. It's just one really strong one. There's a ton of these kinds of things that box us in. When I'm in the classroom teaching, often all I'm trying to do is help young people see that there's such the spectrum of possibility for who you can be and your identity beyond gender. I'm not just talking gender here, in every single way. It's so huge and so unlimited. And we live in such a weird world in which we just celebrate the people who don't keep with the trends, but then we just try to all stay with the trends, right? All the famous people are the people who broke the rules, but everyone's afraid to break the rules so they can fit in.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That's a really good point. Yeah, because we do celebrate rebels and mavericks and trendsetters, right? There's this conformity pressure. Can you talk a little bit about the threat of breaking down those barriers. And I'm thinking specifically of like, the rise of the manosphere and Andrew Tate, right? Or like the trad movement, right? Of like people really wanting to turn back time to that 1950s model that we were chatting about a little bit earlier. Like, I'm just seeing such a backlash to what makes sense. It makes sense of like, just kind of be who you want to be and it's all good, brother. Like, but there is such this like core of people that are really against it. Can you shed any light on what do you think is happening there? Or?
I think there's a lot of ways to sort of to answer that question, and a lot of answers there. I think on the one hand, we can look at this from the big picture kind of psychological standpoint, where you grow up, you learn, you build these sort of structures that allow you to construct your identity and to understand yourself, and nobody likes to have to take them down because it means it means a loss of self, and it means a kind of death of self that you have to be equipped to rebuild. I used to joke when my kids were very little, like I would try, we had a big bin of blocks, and I would build them as the tower as tall as I could, and then they would knock it down and giggle. And I always thought, like, well, right, knocking things down is not actually the hard part. It's the building something new after you knock it down. And I think that's really scary. So I think there's sort of that resistance to those who see that they're in boxes and even want to get out. It's much there's just a kind of compensatory resistance, right? You're just like, nope, not doing that. I also, there's, as I was saying earlier, our economy in some ways are built on many of these binaries, and so we kind of don't know even how to understand self, how to understand achievement, how to understand aspiration without it. In Father Figure, I talk about the degree to which so many even of our psychological theories are caught up in like an Oedipus fatherhood dominance model, right? Like even the people who have like, as much as everyone likes to say we're Freud's been debunked and we throw him out, still everything's kind of based on these Freudian theories on some level, and they inherently have some of that built in. So we still don't have a model for a kind of transcendent kind of consciousness that's beyond it. And then also, there's privilege, and I think privilege has allowed. And I know people don't like that word because there's so many people who are like who are like, well, I'm struggling, I'm broke, I'm not happy, and you're telling me I have privilege, and those are two separate things. But I also understand how hard it is to be told you have privilege when you're seeing your other people do better than you. And I don't blame anyone for feeling that way, but I think privilege often there's as someone who benefits from white male privilege in the classroom, in every place I go, I have a PhD, I look the way I look, I people think I'm smart no matter what, right? I can say dumb things, I still look the part and sound the part, and I get away with a lot just based on that in my life, and always had. And I think it's hard to acknowledge the degree to which some of our achievements are not our own achievements. They're a result of institutional and systemic just factors, and we like to take pride in what we've done, and we deserve to take pride in what we've done, of course, but there's also places where it's not really our own achievement. Who wants to see that? And then if you live in a world which we're living in right now, where people are stopping, are not giving the privilege in the same way that they used to, that can be really hard if you have a lifetime of receiving it. You're like, well, now now it feels like it's an insult, right? Right? If I give you $1 every day and then one day go, oh, nothing today, you're like, well, what did I do wrong? And I'm like, nothing. I just didn't want to give it to you anymore. So I think in some ways we're kind of in that world where it's like privilege. All right, no more, and people feel like that's an insult when it's not an insult. It's just a shift. It's just a shift and a change in the way society is doling out opportunity, and I believe that it's doing it in a much fairer way. But I can understand, it's easy for me to say that because I'm happy and successful and blessed, right? I can see. I used to joke all the time when you hear the people on Fox News complain about the leftist Marxist professors in colleges, I'm always like, well, if you want to get rid of them, you should just pay them a lot more money, right? Like obviously, if they're all broke, they're going to be on the side of take care of the broke people.
For sure. That's good. Yeah, and then I think really true. I mean, like I like to talk to my guys with like blessings and burdens. I think having the other side is also important, right? The stuff we talked about, the patriarchy being oppressive to men as well, right? Like having to be a sole provider, not having, but having the expectation to be a sole provider, right? Or having the expectation to like run in during an emergency and risk your life, right? Or to do the hard, dirty jobs, right? I mean, it's this whole package, and certain groups have more blessings and less burdens, right? And I think white men, we have a lot of blessings, but we do have some burdens that come with it as well.
And it's hard because these systems actually have provided enormous amount of blessings for so many people around the world. And I think a lot of people get that also, right? It's like we built this economic model, we built this 20th century way, 20 and 21st century way of thinking, and more people are fed, and more people are better off than they were before, and it did a lot of good. And we're iterating to something even better. I would hope, but I think it's really hard to hear people going, well, let's start looking at what the problems are. When it's also true that we do live in an unbelievable. Especially those of us in the United States, we live in an unbelievably wonderful world, and with a lot of problems, right? that need to be addressed. And how do you decide? It's always hard to go, I want to both have gratitude for my blessings and acknowledge the burdens.
Absolutely. Yeah. So let's kind of pivot into fatherhood, right? So like, how do you prepare children for this new world? Because a lot of stuff has changed. I mean, we're certainly talking about gender roles. I know you've written another book on technology. I know it's a big interest to a lot of our listeners, a lot of them being fathers themselves. Like, what do you do? Because it does seem, from the outside looking in, that it's accelerating faster than it ever has. It seems like every 5 or 10 years there's some major change, or so even in technology, there's some new app. Now there's Discord, now there's ChatGPT, right? There's like all these ways. Before it was Snapchat. There's like all these ways that like a parent can't really stay on top of. And you also get the fear mongering of the news of people that are like, child predators and sex rings and all that kind of stuff. Like, big question, right? But like, what do you do, man? Like, I guess just like let it rip on like, how do you orient? Maybe speaking to somebody who is thinking about being a father soon, what would you want to tell them? We'll start there. And we can work our way up.
I mean, I tend to think that we all know more than we think, and we're all better equipped than we tend to think. I'm skeptical of the narrative that things are moving so fast. It's not that I don't think there's certainly ways in which we know that's true, where we can map or the economic growth over time and see how it skyrocketed in the 20th century. But I think like for technology, for example. I wrote in my book, The New Childhood, that when we talk about the history of technology, we talk about the iPhone being this like incredible shifting thing, and nobody talks about the HP Pocket calculator, right? Like, but there was actually a new thing every year, going back to like the calculator, and it's just that so many of them look so irrelevant when you look back over 100-year scale. When you look back when you're in it, it always feels like a much bigger thing, right? Like, it'll just be social media in the end. It won't be Discord, Facebook, MySpace, right? When we look back, we'll be like, right, that was the era of social media, and only one will we talk about, and we'll skip those 20 years of, they won't feel like they changed so much. And I think ultimately, what parents have always been tasked with doing, what all caregivers have always been tasked with doing, whether that's teachers, grandparents, anyone who's responsible for kids, is how do we maintain the values of the past, or maybe just the value, just human values, the things that so many people have thought about, that the great religions have thought about, that the great philosophers have thought about, that we've been talking about and writing about and recording and transferring for thousands of years. How do you maintain that while the world is always changing around you in new context? And that's always the challenge. And I think we are equipped to do it. I think we're currently living in a time where people are really scared, as we were just saying, of these changes, and feel ill-equipped. And that's the real danger here, is not knowing how to say, hey, this is what matters, whether kindness matters, whether that's on the playground, whether that's in the classroom, whether that's on social media, whether that's on YouTube, wherever those things are happening, kindness is kindness. And our job as parents, at least, is to be able to go, how can I teach my kid to demonstrate these same values of me as I had, but in a changing world? Of course, we also are nostalgic for our own childhood, and we say things like, but they don't have the same things and we get sad that they don't play the same games we played. And then we also have the things we regret. And like, we were hoping we could raise kids and not have them feel the things we felt, but they're in a different world. So it's a complicated thing, but I think that's the essential thing. And it has always been the essential thing about child rearing. I think when it comes to tech, the tech companies played a great, I actually think it hurt themselves too. They sent this story that they were so powerful that they could like trick everyone and change the whole world. And so now people believe it. And now the tech companies are like on trial for it, when they were just lying to sell ads for them in the beginning. Like, they don't have any special powers. I know that because when I look at my phone, like, I get stories all the time where I'm like, if these algorithms were as smart as you claim, you wouldn't send me these stories. Right? You don't know me at all, Facebook. But I mean, maybe they know how to keep me stuck on Facebook. I don't know. That's possible too. But ultimately, I don't think they're as smart or as technologically proficient. There's no brain hacking going on as much as people like to act like that's, just because you can run an A/B test, which is when you run one thing and then run another and see which one more people choose, right? You can call that neuroscience if you want, but it's not, right? And many people pretend, we're looking at how the brain makes a choice. No, you're not. You're just tracking people's choices, and that's how people always did it. And it's not. And yes, they can do it faster now thanks to computer processing power, but it's not. It's not as magic as we all think. And so, but what I would say, to get back to the original question, what I would say to the parents and people who want to be dads, like, how to do this. Think about the values that matter. And it's all about making sure those values stay in place as you move forward through the world, and you teach your kids to be the kind of people that you want to see in the world, people you want to spend time with, people that people that are the best you can imagine, and all the things that and sometimes that's hard because we're not all doing the best things we wanted for ourselves, and we're not always, I don't want to say that people are bad, but you end up in jobs that were not necessarily the dream you wanted to follow, and then it's hard to sit there and go, hey, I want to teach this kid to follow the dreams, and I don't know, it's a really as you're pointing out, it's a really complicated thing, parenting, but it's also what humans have been doing for a very long time, and I always say, like, I don't think my parents when I was born could have imagined the world that I'm an adult in, and I know my grandparents couldn't imagine the world that my parents were an adult in. So the idea that somehow I'm in a different situation because I can't imagine the world that my kids are going to be an adult in is just, I don't think it's true.
If you're enjoying the podcast so far, please hit the subscribe button and leave us a review. Your feedback helps us to reach more men and inspire them to become the best versions of themselves. Thank you for your support. And now back to the show. The idea of like holding on to these values, right? These traditional values, kindness, honesty, charity, right? Things like that, right? Discipline, hard work, whatever, right? And like the coat of paint is different, but I love that you're saying that like the task is still the same. And it's funny, there's so many of these like Instagram or Twitter accounts, right, that show like news articles from the past, and it's all the same shit, right? People being like, technology's going so fast, right? Or like, it's really scary to raise a kid today, right? I don't know about all this crime, right? Like, it's like people have been saying that. You even go back to like medieval times or dark ages, right? There's like letters that people are writing with the same anxieties that we have. So I think, as me, I'm considering being a father, that's like been really reassuring to me. To know that like this is not new, right? We're not in a particular.
You don't have kids.
I don't have kids. No, me and my wife Caroline are currently trying. We just pulled the goalie like 2 months ago, so it's very, very new in the trying process. But the hope is for
good luck.
Yeah, we're in the conception process. But yeah, it's something that I want, and And that was just it's very reassuring to read some of that stuff, to be like, oh, this anxiety is just probably part of the human experience.
When I was doing my book on parenting and technology, I found stories from the beginning of trains where they were sure that you can't let kids look out the windows while they're in trains because the brain can't handle things moving by that fast, right? Like it'll really mess up their brain. This is the same way people now are like, it's a great giant experiment we're doing on our youth, and we don't know. That's how people thought about trains too. Think about it. No one had moved that fast ever. Right. right. So like they didn't have even motorboats, right? Like this was a brand new thing to me. And people like, can humans handle that speed? And of course we could, right? We adapt. And again, I don't want to say that in a way where people don't like, I'm not trying to deny the fact that there are unique challenges in any way. I'm just saying that the goals haven't really changed. Like certainly social media adds a new, the anonymity of the internet adds a new challenge to teaching kids kindness, to teaching them what it means to carry on a intelligent conversation, right? The world of memes, the amount of video in the world, all these present unique challenges, and they are the challenges that parents have to contend with, but the goal hasn't changed, right? The question isn't how do we make them good with technology. That's never been the goal. That was not the goal with trains. That was not the goal when they invented writing. That was not the goal ever. The goal was always, how do we make sure they're still kind, righteous human beings, no matter what the context around them are, whether they're living in cities or on farms, whether they're driving cars or horses, right? Ultimately, the goal is safety, compassion, kindness, good people, taking care of other people. And, that's we all know that, and we all want to do it. I mean, that's the crazy thing when you look at the political landscape around the world. I mean, certainly in the United States, because that's where we are, but this is true everywhere. You're sort of like, everybody's almost everyone I meet just wants to raise their family and walk their dogs and be able to like eat and feed and their kids and be happy. And most people don't care about a lot of the things that we see talked about on the news. And that doesn't mean that's not important. And I'm not trying to say don't talk about it, because it's hugely important and we need to be politically engaged and active. We are, whether we want to be or not. That's just a fact, right? You can't go through the world without being political in some way. But ultimately, the goals and the essential human values. I mean, there's a reason that you can see that while so many of the world, while religions around the world are all slightly, they all have their differences in how they manifest it and how they describe it and how they get there, but ultimately they're all about love, compassion, taking care of your neighbor, right? They have very different ways of getting there, but there's not one that's about killing. Okay,
right? Yeah, it's all the same kind of it's very classic human values that create a functioning society. On the topic of technology, I'm curious, I'm starting to read some literature as we're trying to get pregnant, right? And there's again, a binary, right? There's people that are saying, hey, go more primal, right? Like kind of the free range parent movement. I mean, my bias, I'm a little more on that. Like you said, I live in rural Colorado, and that's kind of part of that was to raise kids in nature. And then there's some people that are more technologists of no, give your kid the iPad because these skills are going to benefit them in the future for when all the jobs are digital and tech-based. Do you have a sense of that polarity, and what would you say about that?
I'm sort of I'm of two minds on this, because on the one hand, I don't buy this. I'm certainly have. I mean, and I've written books about it. That we don't need to be so scared, and that yes, these are real. These aren't just skills; they're ways of thinking, right? How do you think in a way that is in alignment with the technological paradigm in which you live, right? Like thinking in a world of weaving and printing presses is different than thinking in a different ways of processing ideas. So in that sense, I think it's important that kids get that practice. Then again, I think they get it kind of no matter what, right? Like I'm certainly not a give them an iPad all day kind of, right? And again, those human values have to come first, and those language skills have to come first, and the critical thinking skills, because it kind of doesn't matter how good you are on technology if you can't think, right? It doesn't matter how accustomed you are to working an iPad if you don't know what to do with it. It's sort of, as a college professor, I'm dealing with the AI ChatGPT problem that I'm sure plenty of people are thinking about and hearing. And one of the things I notice is that as powerful as these tools are, they're only powerful if you already have knowledge and the ability to think. Like I get sometimes papers that are obviously written by AI from students, and they're just bad, right? They're bad by AI. Yeah. But then I can get AI to write a pretty good paragraph because I can name like 14 different kinds of like methodologies and be like, can you integrate this idea and that idea? And so in a way, like none of the essential skills have really changed. Unfortunately, the technology has tricked a lot of people into thinking that they don't need to learn a lot of foundational skills, and that, to me, that's terrifying and dangerous. And so that's where I'm like with you, where I'm like, yeah, I mean, you can learn a lot of foundational things from hiking that I'm not sure you can learn from watching YouTube videos all day. Right, you learn about observation, you learn about awareness, you learn about making split-second decisions, you learn about how to learn how to be active, you learn how to basically take all the sensory data around you and to process it and make meaning out of it, as opposed to other people telling you how to do that. Not bad for other people to tell you how to do that. Books do that also, and that's a good thing. And I love videos too, but ultimately we need all those skills. And when my kids were little, I always went with, I wasn't restrictive. I was very, I wanted to be very positive. So my rule was always, we had no rule about how much screen time, but we did have rules like you had to play outside, you had to read books, you had to spend some time doing arts and crafts or whatever the rules were at those days. And as long as you did all those things, if you can still fit in 8 hours of screen time, like, I mean, it's impossible. There's not that many hours of the day, but in theory, if there were, like, the point is that we're giving them a wealth, a full breadth of skills and experiences. And as long as they're getting that breadth of skills and experiences, no one of them is going to be problematic. But anything alone, without the full breadth, I think is problematic. And I think we are seeing a lot of kids right now who don't have a full breadth of experience, and a lot of their experience has been just technological or just video games, and and it is problematic, and especially because of the pandemic, I think we're seeing a lot of that right now. I'm kind of hopeful that's sort of like a 2-year blip that will iron itself out in the long run. But I see it with students. I see it with my own kids. That there were 2 years in which they did not get the full breadth of social experiences that are essential for developing brains.
Huh? Yeah. Well, and I'll throw in, like, I think, like, parent screen addiction too. I mean, I work with a lot of fathers too, and it's like, yeah, you can say, hey, go do arts and crafts, go do hiking, but if you're just sitting in front of the TV on your own iPad, right, the kid's going to be like, well, that's what's cool, right? Like, that's what my dad does every day. So, like, I should do that too. That's what it's all about. So, I always advocate for fathers.
I used to say the same thing, that the lesson that most kids learn on the playground is you're only allowed to curse if you're out of earshot of the teacher.
Right. Right. Yeah. Right. I mean, they like learn how to like hack the system, right? Because it's all modeling and observation. It's very like lecturing is like the least effective form of parenting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess I'm curious to kind of pivot to the feminist part. Is like, when you say how to be a feminist dad, can you explain kind of what you mean by that, or how that might differ from traditional models?
Yeah. I mean, look, if I want to put it this way. First of all, is that I think what's shocked a lot of people about the book is they, I think you hear the book and you think this must be a book about raising daughters. I do have a stepdaughter, but mostly I raised 2 sons, and this was really a book about boys. And I mean, I don't want to say that it's not fixed in that way, but it was really about what it means to present a different gender mindset and to embody that in a nonstop way, so that the kids are equipped, right? So much of parenting, so much of child development is created through habit, I guess. I mean, I'm trying to, I don't want anyone to think I'm like talking in official vocabulary here. I'm kind of thinking as I go along, right? It's sort of like you do the same things over and over again, and you build these kind of habits. You see the models around you, and we know that's how neural networks are built over time, and that's how we grow. And so I wrote the book to really say, what do we have to model, and in not just model, but also create in our interactions with our kids in order to prepare them for a world where gender is more fluid, where the way we think where the way we think about sexuality is more fluid. So on the most basic level, talking about just things like, how do you talk in heteronormative language, for example, right? Like, are you already, so many of us, when kids are already, they're like 2 years old, we're already saying things like, oh, you're going to have a girlfriend one day, right? So we're already setting up these norms, or we're already, there's onesies in Target that say things like lady killer, right? Like they like weird, like sexualized things that are jokes for parents, but they get internalized by kids. So on the most basic practical level, the book is about how to start thinking about where you're seeing those things, right? What does it tell kids when they walk into Target and there's a pink Lego aisle and a blue Lego aisle? Like, why? It's Lego, right? Right? Like, why does it need to be modeled like that? Well, it's not just telling, it's, a lot of people go, well, the girls like different things. Well, no, you're actually teaching them different things, not just different things to like, but different ways to tell their story, different ways to imagine themselves as people, as adults, as heroes, as right? Do you imagine yourself as Sleeping Beauty, or do you imagine yourself as, I don't know, some character from Ninjago, right? Like how do you see yourself long term, and what aspiration, what menu of choices are you providing? So some of it's about practically thinking about those things. There's also a lot in the book about how do we deal with it? Like, what does it feel like to be a dad, right? What does it feel like to be a dad? And on the one hand, we all want to create a world that is so perfect, so much caretaking, so much like I want to create the best possible experience for everyone in my family all the time to the best of my ability. But the line between doing that from a place of care and doing that from a place of dominance and control is really narrow, and really being able to reflect on that in an ongoing way where I'm not saying, hey, I get to define everyone's experience, versus I want to create opportunities for other people to have experiences. And so part of what I was trying to do in Father Figure was to equip people with the tools to interrogate their own assumptions and their own behaviors, so that they could make choices for themselves, right? In many ways, it was a very hard book to write, because I didn't want to say, hey, you should be this way, because as soon as I say, hey, you should be this way, I'm being patriarchal and dominant myself. So and from a writing perspective, it was next to impossible. It took me forever, some sentences, right? Because I had to go, how do I write this sentence in a way where I'm inviting people, not commanding people, right? Where I'm going, hey, here's a way you can think and then come to your own decision, rather than saying, here's the right decision to make. Well, we also do this with our kids all the time too, right? Like sometimes kids come to you and they want things, and we just immediately go into fix it mode, right? Like, let me fix your flat tire, let me fix your plumbing problem, let me right. There's sort of like, I know how to fix an engine, kind of. I don't, but but we have that model of fatherhood, masculinity, and sometimes we want to do that to the people around us, and sometimes the people around us just need to be witnessed. They just need to be responded to. They just need to be affirmed that their feelings are real. Outside of masculinity or any of the things we're talking about, one of the biggest issues I see when I look at parents right now, and Lisa D'Amour, the author of the New York Times, has written a lot about this too. So it's just this. We spend so much time trying to make our kids happy, and the real goal of healthy child rearing, as I'm sure you know, as a practicing psychologist, is the right emotions for the right times, right? Like appropriate emotions for the situation, not good emotions all the time. Like sadness is sometimes the appropriate emotion. You should be worried You worry about your kids when they have the wrong emotion or an exaggerated emotion or an extreme emotion. You don't worry about them when just because they're not unhappy. And so sometimes when they're unhappy, you just have to go, hey, I get it. That's hard. That's really hard. That must be really hard. And that's being responsive. But as fathers, we're so trained to be like, flat tire, I need to go patch it up. Let me fix this for you. Let me fix that for you. Let me solve everything. Let me give you my word of advice. Let me give you my wise father knows best wisdom. And that's not only dominating the people around us, that's also modeling a kind of dominance as maturity, which is not what we want. All right, we don't want another generation to grow up thinking maturity means dominance, power, strength. We don't want a generation of kids who think, in order to prove I'm strong, I'm going to look at an eclipse without glasses on, right? Like that's called stupidity. That's not called strength, right? And we really need to make sure that the only way we're going to raise a generation that doesn't mistake posturing for strength is if they don't see it modeled by the people around them in an ongoing way. So father figure and how to be a feminist dad is really about that. And it's about, the feminists, yes, it's about gender on some level, but it's not about women. It should probably be called genderist, I guess, right? It's about all of us. And it's about, as we said at the beginning of this conversation, the boxes that we're in, and how do you model a world for your kids that shows them not only how they can step out of boxes for themselves, but how they can be welcoming and inclusive for all the people around them, no matter who they are, no matter what they're going through. I mean, it's so important for people to realize. I understand there's so many people who have prejudices for whatever reason, and I don't want to get into say, oh, your prejudice is wrong for whatever, but ultimately just remember the people you're prejudiced against are still people who are still suffering and still have the same feelings as you, and you can not like what they do, but we should try to make sure that they still don't have to suffer while you don't like what they do.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it sounds like a great book for someone who's looking to orient themselves to, I think the more complex needs of kids today. I work with a handful of Gen Z clients, and they are way more emotional needs and emotional complexity than even I did as a millennial. And I imagine, my parents were saying that about me, right? That I was way more emotional than they, right? So I think things are trending in this way where men, I think especially, need to be able to have more of a handle on meeting emotional needs, right? Things like you said, just listening and not solving, or validating feelings or expressing empathy for their children, because I think our needs are becoming less physical, which is a good thing, because of privilege and success and all this stuff, but they are now much more emotional. It's kind of that next level of the pyramid as we are kind of working our way up that as a society.
Yeah, and I think that's really important to say. I'm really glad that you said that, because we see these statistics about how boys aren't succeeding in education, and this is the reason why, actually, is what you're getting at, is that success in our world at this point demands a lot of the skills that have been traditionally coded as feminine, and so the boys are being raised to think they're not supposed to demonstrate them, which makes them unable to succeed because the world demands them, and we're a little confused because we're sort of kind of going. You got people going, well, we should change school to get less of that. I'm like, well, no. I mean, that's based on a lot of research and a lot of science and a lot of serious thinking to get to the point where we could build this world of empathy and emotional IQ and inclusivity, and it's right. I mean, the science backs it up. If you don't want to believe in science, I don't know what to tell you, but the science backs it up, and it's hard. The last thing we want to do is raise yet another generation of boys that struggle to fit into a world that's changing just because it's changing in ways that have been historically coded as feminine.
Right. Yeah. It's a much more collaborative world. It's a much more, intellect-based world, right? It's a much more creative world. Similarly, I guess us still being on the top of that privilege, right? Like things like manufacturing and physical labor aren't as valuable. Like I enjoy them.
Yeah.
And I do hope to, instill that in my children as, as like you said, vehicles for hard work and commitment and discipline and all those things. I think that's important. But yeah, the economy is
saying they're bad things.
yeah. Well, but it's kind of what you're saying, where it's like it's not the thing. It is, but it is like the lesson you're trying to teach with the thing as the vehicle.
Yeah.
I think the view masculinity has to expand that way. Like it's not about can you fix a car? It's like can you diagnose a problem? Can you critically think? Can you figure out what the right tool for the job is? And can you execute on a plan that you made up? And there's 10,000 ways to do that. It doesn't have to be.
And can you empathize with the other person in the car who's feeling anxious because you're on the side of the road while the engine's not working, right? Can you empathize? Because that's part of what it takes to make someone feel safe. That's part of what it takes to solve problems. And yeah, absolutely. And that's back to the beginning of our conversation, why it's so important for us to recognize that these ideas that we have historically coded as masculine and feminine aren't actually connected to bodies, right? Because as soon as we can do that, then we can sit there and go, be as man as you want, as long as you still have empathy, as long as you still have nurturing, as long as you don't think that those things mean you're not a man, right? Like I don't care what a man is or a woman is or a gender nonconforming individual is. I don't care. Whatever you want to call yourself, however you want to see it, that's fine. But if we think that some things are off limits for some identities, again, we're going to continuously end up with people who aren't succeeding because they're being told you can't be yourself and succeed.
Yeah. Well, so let me ask you, kind of switching the axis around on you. Like, what do you think about initiation? Because we've talked about kind of, if it's horizontal axis, male, female, right? And then you have like the age axis, maybe the vertical axis, right? I think that's missing in our society is going from like child to adult, right? Boy to man, girl to woman, individual to adult, right? Like it doesn't matter again, the gender. But yeah, what do you think about having initiation, whether it be rituals or, historically things like the, bar bat mitzvah or quinceañera or the, confirmation? Yeah. I feel like we've lost a lot of those, or those have become like empty traditions. But I do think we need that. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking actually a lot about this lately. So I'm glad you asked the question, and I suspect it's going to play a big part in whatever I write about. Next, I'm a big believer in ritual. I'm a big believer, as I was just saying to you, so much of how we learn is repetition. And from a brain perspective, we build neural networks through repetition. And so those rituals, whether they mean anything or not, whether you understand that, I shouldn't say whether they mean anything, whether they mean anything to the participant, right? Whether you understand them, right? You can speak in what feels like gibberish. We just finished the Jewish holidays, and I went to synagogue. I don't particularly enjoy synagogue. I don't speak Hebrew, but I hear all those things, and I kind of feel like at the end of the day, something happened, whether I knew what I was saying or not, right? Yeah. Right? Like there was a transition, right? There is something in those rituals that do it. So in that sense, I think that's good. Also, we do have a lot of the ways that we have done initiation over time have their own problems. So I think you're absolutely right that we have to think about how we do that, but also acknowledge the problematic ways we've done that, right?
Absolutely.
Hazing, right? Hazing's an initiation ritual. So what I was just talking about in earlier about like Mike's being in the locker room as in middle school, like there are initiation things happening in those spaces that are really problematic, but still do, and sometimes they actually do build character, right? As much as I hate that idea, but at the same time as building character, they might build inappropriate associations with that character, right? Like if hard work gets associated with also being an asshole, right? That's a problem. But learning hard work is a great thing, right? But oftentimes, like I grew up working in restaurant kitchens, and I learned some of the worst toxic masculine asshole behaviors, and thought that that's what work meant.
Yeah.
In some ways, it took me a long time to be able to separate those two ideas and realize that I could still execute tasks with effectively and repetitively, and with and outwork people around me, but I didn't have to do it in a way that was also putting down people around me. And that was a very hard lesson that took me a very long time to learn. And it's kind of part of what got me to writing father figure was going, hey, I hadn't been the best man that I could be for I'm sorry, I shouldn't even say the best man. I haven't been the best person that I could be, and I had to learn how to separate a lot of things in order to do that. So yes, rituals important, but a lot of our rituals are also caught up with problematic ideology and again, this is where things get hard in the same sense as what we were talking about in terms of the values. Is as easy as it is for me to say we all know the values and we have to maintain the values, sometimes it's hard to be able to distinguish fashion from values, right? In the sense that like in the sense that like what I mean by fashion is just it's trend, it's of the time, and we tend to think, like I want to get my kids back to something that only existed when I was a kid, right? Like car culture is just, like the car culture of the movies is a very specific tiny little moment in human history, but there's a lot of people who feel like we can't let it go. It is essential child. Well, it's not. It was one generation, but how do you distinguish those two things? In a way, it was this kind of transitional space, and there are always these kind of transitional spaces, and Reddit and Minecraft and Roblox and Discord and many of those things are the same kind of space as the 7-Eleven parking lot or the video store, or they're the same kind of spaces in that they have that opportunity and that space for initiation and to transition into adulthood. But sometimes we get confused and we're like, you have to do the same things that I did as a kid, and it's not easy. It's not easy to know that difference, and I'm saying that as someone who has spent most of my professional career just trying to tease out those differences in many different ways. So if it's hard for me, it's certainly hard for people who don't do it for a living.
Yeah, and I do hope the initiation comes back, and maybe it's a part of a professional, like personal family culture, right? Because I think of self-efficacy being important, right? Like having your child go through something that they know is challenging and then being able to accomplish it, right? Again, whether that's like a physical challenge or an emotional challenge or a spiritual challenge, but just being like, oh, I did a hard thing and I feel more effective in the world and I build my self-esteem because I accomplished a goal, And then I think like being welcomed into a community of adults, I don't think we have that in the same way. There is something like romantic and kind of magical about like a circle of elders, like acknowledging you as a child and welcoming you as part of a group, part of like a larger group. If you remove all the dogma and the fashion, like I think kids need that. I think they need to feel like they belong and that they've crossed some sort of a threshold. So I do hope you write another book about that. And
I agree with you. If I do write another book about it, but the danger I'm afraid of is that we make sure we're not sort of transmitting intergenerational trauma through those initiation rites, which I think in many ways we often have been, and because we feel like those traumas shape us, right? The trauma, both the big T and the small T traumas shape who we are in so many ways, and then we make the mistake of thinking we have to give those hard experiences to our kids. We don't, and while I agree with you, they should go through a threshold. That doesn't mean they have to suffer trauma.
Absolutely, yeah. They don't have to be like beaten down so they can get built back up. Right? You can walk over.
Put inside a tree trunk for a week, like whatever. like Joseph Campbell always like romanticized the oh, they would take them out there and give them a giant wound.
Yeah, like cut your Achilles tendon and like you kill a bear with a stick or whatever. Right? Yeah, probably. I don't think that's critical now, because again, I think the initiations might be more emotional or spiritual at this point, right? Less physical challenges. But Jordan, this has been a great episode. We're nearing the end. I'm curious if people want to learn more about you, where can they find you online?
Yeah, www.jordanshapiro.org. That's the easiest way to find me. I am Jordosh, Jordosh, on every social media, or all the social medias that I participate in. That's where you find me, and and feel free to reach out. I love to hear from people, and especially love to hear from men who are really acknowledging that we need to take accountability. I used to when I first wrote Father Figure, we had pins that we distributed it that just said like "Man up to feminism," right? Right. It's irony. We shouldn't say "man up to anything," but it was the sort of the irony of what I always found funny is like they're all so tough until you say feminism, and then suddenly all the stoics, they're all afraid of it, right? Right? Where's that strength? Where's that strength? You can look at the eclipse, but you can't handle a conversation about gender.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe and leave a review. And don't forget to visit menstherapy.online to learn more about the work that we are doing to support and inspire men. Until next time, keep moving forward.